have been exposing. Just allow me 1 minute, maximum 2 minutes, even less that if I'm able. Of all the interesting points, I think that it is clear that there is a certain urgency to act. But this urgency, that means that we need for action now, as soon as possible, but in view of the long term. We all recognize the importance, and the long term is important because this has got to do with sustainability, but this has got also to do to a more general approach that goes into the direction of having the readers, which for me are the citizens. For me, they are the citizens at the center of the attention, not those that pays for advertisement. So basically, what we need, it is important to have a media sector, a strong European media sector, but this has got to be a healthy media sector, healthy from the economic and financial point of view, from the cultural point of view, but also from the influence of governments. The media sector needs support, both at political and at financial level. And the responses, they've got to come at different level, at the European level, at the national level, at political and financial level. I go back to what has been put forward by one of our speakers. We need to rebalance the ecosystem in order to have diversity, in order to have educated citizens that can understand the challenges of others have been calling the cost of Europe and the cost of not Europe. We need support at political and financial level. We need a change in culture, especially in a period in which we can question if the policy to the opening of media ownership are the right one, especially in a period in which we see that, as somebody has said, it's very easy to come up with disinformation and fake news. But in order to have a healthy media sector, we need transparency, we need accountability, and probably we need to review our approach to the social media and social platform monopolies, because we are talking about monopolies. We can play it with words, but this is what we are talking about. I see that in the chat there are a few questions. I would invite the public, the participants to come in, to bring in their own thoughts. But I would like also to invite very, very shortly, please, and I'm referring to the panelists, to react to each other comments and addresses. One question, the last one that is on the line, is how can we limit misinformation from some politicians on Twitter and Facebook? From Ivana, from Dragos, how can academia contribute to improve the media literacy of European citizens? Very good point. Could reshaping language be a solution? So I leave the 5 panelists to a first very, very quick reaction, and I invite you all the panelists to look into our chat box if they want to react to one or the other particularly challenging questions. So I think that we started with Renat, and Renat, I'll give you the floor, the screen back to you if you want to quickly react, but very quickly. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Well, thanks for all of you. I think very, very interesting contributions. I like very much, because this is something we have been doing for years as well, that we have, of course, the public, the readers in the center. The audience engagement is very, very important. We are very sick and tired by commercialized media, by clickbait philosophy, and all what has been happened in the last 20 years that have not helped to create more trust. And we completely agree with the need for more diversity, with the need more training, with the need for a change in culture, indeed. And it's also true what has been said, that specifically in France and Germany, you don't find qualified journalists anymore, because young people cannot do their living from journalism. So yes, we cannot rely on advertisement, because I agree this is very dangerous. On the other hand, we need funding, we need capital, as was said by all. And I think there we have different measures. We cannot only say, there was one question, subsidies. It's not only subsidies, that would never work. We need much more than subsidies. We need, it's not a one fit, we said. We need a bunch of different measures to keep this important journalism media system going. I stop now, otherwise.
Luciano, your mic is mute.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Vincent. I was telling to everybody that the chat box is getting full with comments. Vincent, you are the second one to speak, so I think you can offer your quick reactions.
I mean, first of all, I'm really impressed by the contribution of all of you. I think that summarized pretty well the debate, and I'm pleased also to see that it's not only focusing on subsidies. You know, my personal experience on that is that being the advisor of 2 ministers over 4 years, we spent 6 million euros to support the French press and the French journalists. What is left of that money, which has been spent on the taxpayers' money 8 years ago? Nothing. The distribution system in France is collapsing, is bankrupting. So money is not the solution. Public money is not the solution. I mean, that's my only experience sharing. Question about the misinformation. I mean, it's so big. I'm not sure we can address that, but I think everything we can do as media professionals to support fact-checking and address misinformation in face of the public is absolutely necessary. And I think that the core element is education. If you don't have any educated and really focusing the efforts of the public education on what is media, what is news. As Christophe said, you know, it's amazing to see that the media policy program or the media program at the European level does not address media. So I think who knows what is media? And I'm talking about political decision makers at the European level. So what can you expect from the citizens if even their leaders do not understand what is media? I think education is fundamental, and it's not. I think I mean what I see in our programs in my country is not really promising in that respect.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Meanwhile, I see that there is a question from Georgiana, which is I can turn into, do you believe that a public broadcaster will be able to survive without a kind of private or partly private funding? Christophe, the floor is yours for your short feedback and observation on what has been said so far.
Sure. I don't have much to add. I would just like to stress 4 points which are a bit between the lines. First of all, there is a lot of self-flagellation in the media sector about increasing the trust, the reader orientation, the fact that we do have fake news from time to time, etc. It's not the main problem. Let's not confuse the tree and the forest. The main problem is on the platforms. And they make a lot of money thanks to fake news and other types of things, which leads me to my second point. Already 3 years ago in this high-level group on fake news, we agreed, even with the platforms themselves, to go for co-regulation, not self-regulation. But what the EU institutions have done is only self-regulation. And there is a risk that now they will add to self-regulation a complex legislative process, which will be far too long. So it's really time to use the instruments that exist. And the only thing that platforms fear, and the only thing that can really make a difference in terms of rebalancing the ecosystem, is competition policy. I'm biased. I was once with DG Competition, but I know these instruments, and it's high time that they are used. I have a slight disagreement with Vincent regarding the use of subsidies, and perhaps I agree more with Renate on this point. In general, I think subsidies should be limited to skills and R&D, so basically innovation. But right now, in the short-term crisis, I think they have a role to play in order to save some of the companies. It's not as good as private sector investment of good, of course, but maybe it's needed. It was interesting what you said about the French taxpayers' money paid. I would take the point more generally. Right now, Google and Facebook do invest in media innovation. They do help the media sector, and they spend a lot more on it than the EU. But of course, they do it with ulterior motives. They have public affairs goals in doing so. Recently, they launched a kind of coronavirus crisis plan. I'm talking now about the Google one. And read the fine print. You have to be a Google partner to get the money. So basically, this is a kiss of death. you have to accept their conditions in order to get a little bit of money. That's why we also need private sector money and perhaps public money. Sorry, my statement was too long, Lucian.
Nevertheless, interesting. While Beatrice and Alvaro think about their short reactions, there are comments from Georgiana and from Renat in our chat. Please have a look. Let me be a little bit provocative, because it's now, I think, something like 25 years that I am around the Brussels circle, if you want. And I can assure that I always heard the criticism and people in the media sector complaining that it is not enough what the European Union is doing. It is not enough what is in the media program. It is not enough what is in the Creative Europe program. There should be more and more. But now I'm referring to the three practitioners, Christophe, Renat, and Vincent, and also to the fact that I referred before to three different initiatives that we are doing. Don't you think that a more corporate response, a more corporate challenging, compelling the European Union with what is needed, a more united media stakeholders approach to demand your needs to the European Union would be necessary? But don't answer now, because I want to make sure that Beatrice and Alvaro have got the possibility to jump in the conversation. So Beatrice, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I see. Now it's ready. Well, it's a very old discussion of that, how much we have to shake the EU. But let me just say something that fascinates me. In this crisis where all this explosion of the awareness about disinformation has emerged, both on media, on citizens, institutions, everybody talks about disinformation and how leaders are doing this and that. And I have not heard a word about the European plan on disinformation that was announced and implemented since December 18. And nobody talks about this, even the European Commission, even the President of the Commission. She said not a word about this, and how the member states and the governments are mandated to do a monthly report on this, and how the platforms have been, you know, after 1 year of this plan running, how this voluntary code of practice has been dealt with, and how we need to go now into the regulation on this. This is quite interesting now, because this is in the heart of what is happening now on the media sector, on the trust on media, and on the future of journalism, I think.
Thanks a lot, Beatrice. And before I give the floor, the screen, sorry, to Alvaro, I think that in our chat we have got a very, very important point, which is related to media ownership. Basically, what we can consider still a public service broadcaster when we don't know, point number one, or we are not sure where the co-financing comes from, and to what extent is still a public if a lot of what permitted to function is not public financing. Alvaro, please, go ahead.
Thanks for the easy question. Well, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think that if we are to address this at the European level, I would agree with Christophe that competition policy is part of the solution, and some players just have gotten too big and are too dominant, and if they continue like this, they will have no incentives to, for instance, follow the voluntary code of practice that is voluntary. They don't even have to follow it because it's not mandatory, which already shows their influence in the market. And as for the public service broadcasting, well, we do need accountable media, and I think that you do need a certain diversity in terms of ownership, because if you have a lot of media channels, but they are all owned by the same person, including the government, because we also have seen abuses of public media in some countries, for instance, Hungary, then that also poses democratic problems.
Thank you, Alvaro. If there are no other questions from the participants, I would invite the three practitioners to answer my provocation, if you have got time.
I mean, regarding media ownership, it's always, I mean, a critical element of the discussion. I understand that. I mean, but how do you make a difference between NewsQuest in the UK and another big owner? I mean, what is the criteria to say, okay, this is a decent media owner and this is not a decent media owner?
Are you directing this to me or to Alvaro? Or
I'm directing that to Alvaro. I think Christophe made a point on that, and certainly Renato has an opinion on that. I mean, I work for a company which is now named Tamedia, and Tamedia has a big stake of the media ownership in Switzerland. I mean, is it not acceptable because it's their media?
If you ask me, my point is not that it is not acceptable. My point is when it is not transparent. Alvaro thinks about in terms of degree of concentration. What I would like to see if a very transparent way to see if I'm reading the news from the publisher X, Y, or Z, I want to have a little bottom that tells me these are all those that contribute to this, with advertisement and with a direct injection. I think that would be enough, because that would be a way for us to, for the citizens, for the readers, as you said, because I really like your point, Vincent, about going back to the reader, not to the advertiser. This is key, this is key, this is key. But I think I want more transparency, basically. And sometimes, for some media outlets, this is evident. Some other times, those that finance the news, those that finance the media outlet, they simply don't want to be seen as people behind. This is my personal and humble opinion. I see that Christophe has his hand raised, but I think also Renat wants to intervene. This is my feeling. Christophe, go ahead, and then Renat.
Renato first.
Renat first.
Well, there are three issues now. There were three issues. One was Luciano with European media. I think, first of all, I do want to be a bit optimistic as well. I think this commission has done much more on media than any other before. Of course, there's never enough, but that has to be said. Second, on putting the global issues, European issues, more in the national media sphere, that is always a challenge. I think it will always be a challenge. It's been a way disappointing that COVID has put the national agenda much higher. Every government wanted to show they are better. Only solidarity and looking at the other countries came much later, which is really strange when you think that this is a global crisis and there is a way of exchanging and all that. But there is a direction which is changing a bit. I wanted to say something on disinformation. I also do think that the Commission is doing something on disinformation, be it on the Digital Service Act, which is coming up. It will also be part of the Democracy Action Plan, which is coming up, and the response regarding the platforms is coming soon. So I don't want to be unfair vis-a-vis them. I also can say that platforms have been doing quite well on COVID. It shows that if they want to, they can. But we know what is behind. This is again the profit question. On media ownership, yes, I agree with Luciano. Transparency is important, but I also think, and that's why in my speech I stress so much the local journalism level, because this is the most dangerous one. We are talking about local democracy, and at local level you often only have one media, and that cannot be. I'm sorry. And the problem, of course, is in concentrated regions, like also in Germany, North Rhine-Westphalia, if there is one paper owned by, they share the same newsroom, they share the same news, so you read 3 papers or 3 news with the same content. And I don't think that's what, Vincent, you said before in terms of diversity and content and quality. It just doesn't go hand in hand. So I think we have to be coherent. That's very
Thank you very much, Renat. I see that Christophe has his hands up. I'm asking Beatrice and Alvaro and Vincent, of course, do you still want to reply, or because I need to measure my time? No, Alvaro says no. For Beatrice is okay. Vincent?
Yeah, my experience about media ownership is that actually, I mean, transparency and clarity about the editorial line is key. Again, I'm just referring about my personal professional experience. I work in an independent French-Swiss company, which has been purchased by a German-Swiss company. And from the perspective of Zurich, Lausanne and Geneva are secondary in their priorities. So they don't give any capacities to their local newsrooms actually to develop what the previous honors. But that has nothing to do about the influence, the transparency, where the money is. It's again a matter of understanding what are the dynamic of reader engagement and trust in the market. What is happening now is that these companies, because as Renate said, they share the same news desk and they deliver the same news all over the place in Switzerland, does not address the needs of the local people. Ultimately, I think they will close their papers in this part of their market. So again, I mean, it's a little bit more complex than about ownership. It's about responsibility, editorial responsibility, and I don't see any regulatory response to that. You know, it's a business responsibility as well as a social responsibility.
Christophe, you wanted to say something?
Yes, a few points on related topics. First of all, going back to Beatrice, who was talking about the disinformation action plan. In my view, this was just a short-term response to the risk of the EU elections being hijacked. And unfortunately, it's a typical political situation. There was a high-level expert group recommendations, 95% endorsed by the Commission, and then they took only what was of interest to politicians, which is basically to ensure European Parliament elections. And actually, it did work from a certain viewpoint, because there was not so much Russian interference, and also the voting turnout was increased. But there were many other points. All the issues we discuss now, they are known for years, and most of the solutions are known for years as well. I've talked already about co-regulation. We were told that there would be an economic study about the ecosystem. It has not happened. Now we badly need it, obviously. And there was talk about sector inquiry. Let me say a few more words about that, because I think sometimes some academics, not necessarily Alvaro and Luciano, are sometimes fighting the battles of the past, talking about transparency of media ownership, etc. Yes, and it was an issue 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but you should define the market properly. The issue is not just the media market as you see it. We are talking of an information market where the dominant players are the platforms. That's why we need a sector inquiry, both by economists and also by competition lawyers, looking at the full picture and looking at where the fake news is coming from and where is the advertising going, etc. Don't fight battles of the past, but the battles of the future. And finally, a controversial point regarding media ownership. And sorry, because I will use caricature language and I would be more elaborate if there was time. Concentration is necessary. There are scale effects. The big battles of the future for the media are about skills and technologies. And there you have big scale effects. Shrinking within national borders or within regional borders is not enough. So you need European networks of media just cooperating or integrated companies in order to fight the battles of the future and to better exert their power vis-à-vis the platforms. This should be anticipated rather than fought against, and it should be done in a social way with strong accompaniment, just like it has happened in many other sectors. So we should not regret the structures of the past, but think about the structures of the future. Thank you.
Well, it's time now to close this, and allow me to close this to thanks, first of all the participants in the panel. It has been an extremely rich conversation. Allow me, in this period in which we read a lot that Netflix is increasing the number of subscribers, and so is doing Amazon Prime. Let me go in the past. Let me go to the past and show, if you can see this. I'm not sure that you can read the title, but this is a classic for media scholar, Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death. This is a book that I cannot avoid rereading now, that was written in 1985, I think the first edition. amusing ourselves to that, and sometimes because I use Netflix, I'm not ashamed to say this, I am on social media, but sometimes I ask myself if the truth of this book shouldn't be put much more forward into the discussion. Now, again, thanks a lot, and it's Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to That is a book that I suggest, that I invite everybody to read, because it is even more actual today than it was 30 years ago. Having said this, with this little sarcastic